forward, it would be great for us all to get on the same page regarding what generative AI is. Dr. Brett McKinney, can you give us a good definition of generative AI and where it fits into other forms of AI?
Yeah. So generative AI is referring to some kind of model that will create, basically generate a sequence of things. Like in the case of ChatGPT, it starts with a word, and then it looks for the next like most probable word, and then it just then looks at the next most probable word, given that you gave the previous word, and then all those are strung together, and then remarkably, the way this particular neural network is put together, it looks almost indistinguishable from what a human would write. And so that's sometimes called, sometimes those are trained using what's called an adversary, where you basically, you have a generative model that is creating text, and then you have something that's not human text. And so you're trying to trick the model into uh, uh, basically not being able to distinguish between human and random or and non-human. And so that's sort of in a feedback loop until you basically get something that could nearly pass like a Turing test, which is like where you can't tell the difference between when you're typing to something whether it's human or not. And so and this is just trained on ChatGPT is trained on just books and data from the internet. And this particular model is using what's called a neural network. And so, and you can think of a neural network as just like a big function. And so, and it can basically, it's just a function that will just generate outputs. And it's like a regression model. And it has all these parameters in it, like a regression model where you put in some data and then it predicts some other data point. But this just happens to be one that has like billions and billions of parameters in it. And it's not really trained on to know, it's not told like what grammar is or anything like that. It just learns these things. They just sort of emerge in the neural network. And so in some ways it's like sort of how the human brain works in a way. Like you just give examples to a child and they kind of figure out like how to make sentences. And so it's actually pretty impressive what it's capable of, given the you know it's kind of surprising how well it works when it's just a bunch of these basically regression models, and it's these things that have like human like behavior emerge from this bunch of regression models.
So kind of leading off of, kind of curious to get back to Lydia's question about brokering the microphone and OpenAI. A little bit about how that was done, what you learned from it, experience.
Sure. It like many things started off with a phone call. So a certain person who likes to build cars and spaceships made a phone call to the CEO of Microsoft, Satya Nadella, and shortly after that, I got a phone call. And in it said, "Hey, OpenAI is working on this project." At that time, they were a small nonprofit, so this is back in 2017. They need a massive amount of compute in a very short period of time. So on the order of magnitude, over 100,000 CPUs and over 14,000 GPUs, or graphics processing units. So I think you have one in a high-end, gaming computer. Well, imagine having 14,000 of those. And they wanted to see if we, as an organization, if Azure could actually supply that. And so we had a series of meetings with them. So I put together an interdisciplinary team to evaluate this. And one of the things that we identified was, on the hardware side, we could solve the problem. We had a lot of much smarter people than me, data scientists and developers who were figuring out like how to move their containers from their existing environment into ours. And then we also had a team that was going into like, what is exactly are they trying to solve for? And so what happened was, over the period of just a few short months, we ended up in the middle of what's now known as Climate Pledge Arena, in front of 18,000 people, in basically the largest esports gaming event in the world. So you have the top 3 esports players in a game called Defense of the Arts 2, or Dota 2. And the OpenAI team came up with a USB stick and plugged it in and handily beat all three of the top players. And again, that was a precursor actually to the model. So the large language model that's actually used in ChatGPT. But in that particular case, what they were doing was letting it play the game, learn the rules of the game, and ultimately, anticipate the next step for the competitor. So they did that 1v1. And then very rapidly, in less than 18 months, had a 5v5. So 5 bots playing against 5 human players, and were able to beat them. And so there's a tremendous amount of research that came out of that, tremendous amount of academic papers that came out of that as well. So I don't think any of us at the time thought that OpenAI would become as big as they have, as quickly as they have.
From a creator's perspective. So thinking about, OpenAI from a user's perspective, I have a question for Mr. Paul Tucker. Has BOK discussed using readily available AI like ChatGPT? And if so, what area of the company does BOK think it will be beneficial or harmful?
Good question, Lauren. So first of all, artificial intelligence, machine learning in general, my role at the bank is cybersecurity. And so kind of the way Sean was talking about bots versus bots, it's the same type of thing that we have to continually move to with our first line defenders. And if we do not have, the capability of having artificial intelligence and machine learning, it's a human versus bots, and we know how that ends, right? It doesn't work out very well. And so we've got to continually try to find new ways to be able to enhance our capabilities of attacks, definitely to a bank, right? There's so many different accounts, and why do cyber criminals go to banks? Is because that's where the money is, right? And so we've got so many different types of attacks that we continue to see along that line. Now, when we go back to GPT now, and how could we use it within the bank? So right now we have a kind of a tech team that is working through the scenarios of regulations. Financial institutions that have a tremendous amount of regulations. They're worried about bias. They're worried about, if you make loans to individuals, are you biased on who you loan to? And if you use these types of scenarios, would that tell you, these are the individuals you need to loan to, and how do we know that it doesn't have bias built into those scenarios? And so a lot of the way that we're doing these things are typically in the IT area right now and in the cybersecurity area. For us to be able to, we develop code, and a lot of times we have a lot of new students that are with us for the first time. They have a tremendous amount of knowledge, but they just need somebody to help check. Is this code going to work appropriately? I intend for it to work this way. And we don't just take whatever the code says and go put it in a BOK application and just say it's going to be good, right? We still have to have peer review. We still have to have these kind of things along the line. So we are still a ways away from it, just letting it do what it does. There's a lot of management and they kind of call it co-pilot that you have to kind of watch how this works from that side. But ultimately, we think this is going to be a game changer for us. We're going to be able to augment cybersecurity analysts to make decisions on whether or not, is this a good IP address? Is it a bad IP address? Is it a bad email account? And those kind of things happen in milliseconds. I mean, you can't wait 5 minutes to determine or not whether the person on the other side of this is good or bad. And so we really think that this is going to be a game changer for us in the future.
Same question to DoRemus. Has John discussed using readily available AI like ChatGPT?
We have, and we're in an odd position that we support so many different types of businesses. Can't necessarily just focus in on one thing. I'm so glad you said machine learning like 3 or 4 times, because I'm having the hardest time still calling it AI. I'm sorry, really, really smart stuff. I mean, like incredible. I mean, like, because it is machine learning, right? But is it intelligence yet? You gave a talk in 2019 where you defined it, and I was like, well, I guess he's right. But it still feels like machine learning, right? And we're still teaching it, right? So speaking of teaching it, so in regards to AI, so all of us have been using AI or machine learning in one way or another for quite a while, right? You might have used it, doing a map to get here. For our clients, we're primarily using AI, not so much Chat GPT yet, although I'll talk about that in a second. We're primarily using it in the phishing and antivirus sort of scenario, right? So antivirus used to be just pattern matching, file names, that kind of stuff, right? Well, now we've graduated up to EDR, so endpoint detection and response. You're using that, I'm sure, right? And that's utilizing AI using machine learning. I see a client or two in here that we are doing phishing filtering for. It's my favorite product that we sell because phishing is the most dramatic thing that we have to deal with for our clients. It's also the largest attack vector that we see. And so we're utilizing AI to take a first look at mail as it's going through. And then also once the mail's already in the mailbox, many of our users, they'll be looking at something, go, that looks kind of fishy. And then boom, the AI picked it up and popped it into delete. That's pretty cool. It's a force multiplier for us. So we're all going to start utilizing AI in more interesting and fascinating ways. ChatGPT, we've used it to build some PowerShell scripts. They were a lot wrong, but they were so right that it took, a day's worth of work down to maybe an hour or two. That's huge. And it's just going to get better and better, right?
Are you seeing tech being by our industries? What are some of the example journalism?
And you might repeat the question that they're asking, because I think it's hard to hear in the very back of the auditorium.
So the question is about how are we seeing the media industries affected so far, and where might this technology be used in future? Can everyone hear in the back? Is that good? So BuzzFeed News today just announced that they are shuttering their news operations. So BuzzFeed is closing their news operations and laying off about 15% of their workforce overall. And Insider News just last week laid off about 10% of their news force, including staff writers. So none of these changes, along with other changes that we're seeing, downsizing, streamlining, and so forth in digital media over the last year, but also a much longer structural shift in news media over the past couple of decades. None of this is due specifically to just AI or just ChatGPT for this round or anything like that. However, it is contributing to these larger structural changes. And both the BuzzFeed and Insider CEOs, in their memos announcing these layoffs, specifically cited AI as being something that they were shifting towards to produce more and more of their content. So while not being the only cause, it is part of the swell of effects that are shaping our media industries. So I think that's interesting and important to note. These are small examples in the larger scheme of things, but they do raise a lot of questions for us about our news media and its consequences for our democratic public sphere and public participation in our political systems and everything else that we do when we're interacting online. So on the one hand, as we've just learned, these are probability-driven models. They have no means to detect fact from fiction, right? They are generating very convincing, compelling, decently, maybe C+B level writing for the most part, that is neutral and fine sometimes at explaining things in the world, right? But it's, on the one hand, only as good as its data, and the data that it's trained on, like many AI systems that have been studied over the past decade, has problems. And so there are a lot of issues that can be taken up in the use of these systems in media sourcing. Issues of bias, issues of ethnocentrism, gender issues, racial bias, things like that, which we've seen and have documented in other sectors like healthcare and policing and hiring and things like that. It also begs us to think about what is happening to our readership, to us as individuals who are consuming news media. What happens when For instance, CNET published a bunch of articles in the fall that were written primarily by AI, but it didn't label them as such. They were put out into the public sphere. People were reading them, and it was just published as by CNET money staff. So when people started looking into that, wondering what that moniker was, who actually wrote this, people started fact checking and found that of the 77 articles that were published by CNET and their internal AI tool, it's not ChatGPT, but it's their own internal tool, they were riddled with inaccuracies, with mistakes, and with outright plagiarism, with misquoting of other sources, and a whole bunch of other issues. Even though CNET said that human editors went back and read and checked all of these articles. So CNET immediately said, we're going to stop using AI to generate content. But that's just one example among others. So, so there are a lot of big questions to be raised about how this can increase efficiency, how it can replace workers, and what it means for our public discourse and the perpetuation of misinformation, or just increasing that gray area where people are not quite sure the sourcing of what they're reading.
Said I read through those, didn't know they were wrong. Dr. Kish, Dr. Joplin, and Dr. McKinney, as professors, what do you think about generative AI? I wrote it after, but generative writing tools being used in your classroom? And on the other hand, Sean Alexander, as trustee at TU, what does the board think about AI?
So when I first became aware of ChatGPT and those types of tools, like a lot of faculty, I had concerns. I was like, how is this going to impact the work that our students are doing? And then at some point, I just realized students are going to use AI tools like ChatGPT. I mean, we could try to stop them. It'd be like holding up your hands and trying to stop the Oklahoma wind. It's not going to happen, right? And so instead, I shifted and tried to think about how can I use these tools in my classes to enhance learning and to help my students understand better the risks, the benefits of using these tools, and ultimately come out with better work at the end, right? And so, and come out better prepared. And over my career, in different industries and different professions, we've all seen different technologies come through, and there's been a hesitation to embrace them. When I first set for the CPA exam, you couldn't use a calculator on the CPA exam. And even then, I didn't know a single accountant that didn't use a calculator, right? That didn't make any sense. I suspect when spell check was first added to word processing programs, that instructors thought, well, this is going to dumb down our students, right? And so I think it's a matter of understanding the pros and cons and embracing that. And so what I do in my class, in my business strategy class, my students have a term project where they analyze the business strategy for a publicly held company, usually results in about a 25 page paper. And I encourage them to use ChatGPT, but to fully disclose how they used it, what they found the shortcomings to be, the things they had to fix, and what type of things they had to do to fix that paper or improve it to raise it to the level of quality they wanted for their finished product.
Yeah, I think that's great. I mean, this is happening so quickly. ChatGPT was released in November, right before final exams and essays and all that sort of thing. And faculty were left sort of scrambling to figure out how to use it. And it's true, there's no value in being technophobic here. This is going to be changing all of the workplaces that our students are graduating into. And so there's no reason to run from it or to deny it. Although some faculty are little unsure how to even understand what it is or what to do with it. But there's a lot of creative, inventive stuff happening. And so faculty are coming up with all kinds of interesting assignments, just like these, where the emphasis hopefully continues to be on identifying what can these tools do to help students? What are they good at? So maybe outlining papers, playing with prompts, having conversations to work out and strengthen your ideas, but not to write your full paper, because it has these technologies tend to be really good at making up citations, entirely fabricating quotations and things like that. And students aren't necessarily always aware of that. So I think that we are all doing our students better service if we're having very open conversations about what these technologies are and how they can be of use, but also really what their restrictions and limitations are. But I think it also opens up a lot of great opportunities for us as faculty, regardless of our field, to really ask these bigger social and ethical questions about what is the role of these technologies in the different sectors that we're moving into, what impact can it have on bigger questions of justice, access, on how our institutions, political, economic, or otherwise, are shifting into the future, and what it means that these technologies are arriving so quickly that they're very much ahead of regulation, ahead of regulatory oversight, and the importance of asking those difficult questions as people graduate into different work forces and are asked to use them in different capacities to really bring in the way that we in media studies we like to think about media literacy and better informing students about sources of information, disinformation, and being credible news consumers. I think that we also need more information and algorithmic or AI literacy, and that's something that we can all sort of take on and instill as a matter of basic civic knowledge.
And from the computer science side, teaching like programming classes, ChatGPT can do all of your homework. I mean, so we have to figure out how do we make sure that we have a generation of computer scientists and other types of students who understand the basic things instead of just yes, ChatGPT is an amazing tool that they're probably going to use. Students are going to use their whole lives, but you also have there's certain basic things that you probably also need to understand. So we have to think about rethink how we're going to teach. And this happened when Mathematica was invented. Like Mathematica could do calculus, like it could solve all of your calculus homework. So, well, we don't need to know calculus anymore, and some people maybe don't. But so we have to figure out what basic things do people need to understand about an algorithm or how to invent algorithms, and maybe also challenging people to think at a higher level. Like there are certain things that the computer can do for you, and so you're going to have to think, well, what are things that computer can't do? And so we need to teach those skills. I think there's like certain things that you need to just know how to, like, maybe if you're in math, how to take an integral. Like even though Mathematica can do it, you need that knowledge. It helps you think about some of these bigger questions. So it's a big challenge, and we're having to rethink how to teach everything, I think. And I was just going to interject that when I was giving my introduction, I should have said that this isn't really AI. It's not really artificial intelligence. I mean, you could say that it's not true. Like there's different levels of artificial intelligence. Like there's like strong artificial intelligence where it has consciousness. You know, that's strong AI. I would almost consider ChatGPT maybe like weak AI, where it looks like AI. You know, it's sort of indistinguishable sometimes. But then machine learning is like the algorithms that are used to train things. So there's like all these different algorithms that people use to train things. So those are good points he brought up.
Yeah, so I would say, you know, from a trustee perspective, and great point. I mean, artificial general intelligence is still far off. And I think that the talk that you were referencing, I actually love to open up C-suite conversations by asking, what is AI? Because I always get worried looks, executives looking at each other. They're like, nobody has defined it because it means something different to everyone. But we know that machine learning, as an example, has existed for over 60 years in the finance space. Like it's probability. It's used for doing things like credit risk analysis and adjustment. And so from a board perspective, we started having preliminary conversations in 2018 through the lens of what can we do to create a better experience for our students and to ensure that they are successful in graduating. And that starts off with having high quality data. So working with the CIO to ensure that we have signal in terms of things like ensuring that we know the students that perhaps are struggling a little bit in a particular area, or maybe need a little bit more wraparound support. Even back then in 2018, different software providers were starting to add machine learning, where it can kind of reason over signals that if you're a traditional advisor, you may miss that. So it in effect becomes a co-pilot in terms of helping with student success. The second, I think, which is really I'm passionate about, is most of like the breakthrough innovations and kind of aha moments that I am seeing in AI right now, specifically ChatGPT, are coming from the academic community. So if you look at Professor Ethan Mollick and what he's doing at Stern's, NYU Stern School of Business, he is writing volumes in terms of how his students are learning. I mean, he told them you have to use ChatGPT and you have to use DALL-E, which is image generation platform, in your classroom. And so there's been some really interesting insights that have come out of that I think are prime for kind of shared learning between, in the spirit of shared governance, between the administration, the faculty, and the board. In fact, I was just speaking with Chairwoman McLeod this morning. So she's the chair of the Board of Trustees. And we have an upcoming meeting in one of our council meetings, excuse me, a committee meeting next month, where we're specifically going to talk about AI and how we can use this. For fun, about a month ago, I decided to use ChatGPT to write a piece on LinkedIn called, "Can ChatGPT be used to formulate more effective boardroom strategy?" And so what I did was I took one of President Carson's, North Stars, which is to move the university from a Carnegie R2 to an R1 position or stature. And basically that has a number of different dimensions. And so what I did was I took Professor Mollick's suggestion of giving ChatGPT a persona. I said, you are the president of the University of Tulsa, a Carnegie R2 NCAA Division I institution. You're about to present to the Board of Trustees a 5-point plan on why we should move from Carnegie R2 to R1. And within seconds, I had what I would say is an 80% of what was actually formulated between the board and administration in terms of the core areas of investment that need to happen across the institution, move from Carnegie R2 to R1. So then I decided to go ahead and throw another one at it. And I said, okay, now you're the president of the university again, and you need to present a 5-minute presentation to the Board of Trustees based upon this 5-point plan. And bam, it went ahead and built it out for me. And so what I did was I shared that with President Carson before I published this, of course. And his response was, "This is great. By the way, can I use that speech?" So, and of course, it's tongue in cheek, but I think it speaks to what we're seeing particularly in the computer science space as kind of the tip of the spear. We talk about like 10x multipliers in terms of developers. Not all developers are equally efficient. There's some that just have this ability to see through the data, see through the problem, and we call that they're 10xers. What we're observing is that with ChatGPT or like GitHub Copilot running alongside, checking your code, providing recommendations, that there's such an order of multiplier effect that's happening in terms of efficiency that we're still trying to figure it out in terms of just how far this is going to go. And so I think that's an example of one of the conversations that we need to have. And I think, Brett brought it up perfectly. It's like we have to teach the students how to use this in an ethical and responsible way and teach them what it means to be in an organization that responsibly uses AI.
How and where has Microsoft embraced AI? And then you mentioned conversations with C-suite executives. So what common themes about AI have you seen among any Fortune 500 executives that you met with?
Sure. I'll start off with just a quick example within the company. So we formulated the Microsoft AI and Research Organization. So the traditional Microsoft Research org that is where we have most of our academics that are publishing papers. We brought those two organizations together. We actually pulled all of our AI talent from across the entire company into a single organization and started evaluating them in terms of their capability and their passion. So there are some that are passionate about publishing papers and like traditional, academic AI. There are others that are passionate about applied AI, who want to build product and see, their innovations see the light of day. And so what we did was basically, it was the fastest reorg I've seen in Microsoft. In 6 months, we evaluated, and then what we started doing is deploying our talent into the individual product groups. So we knew that day was going to come, that things were going to get to the point that we are today. And so what has happened as a result is in the matter of 6 weeks, Microsoft has gone from announcing GitHub Copilot, which was announced last year, which helps developers in writing code, to announcing M365 Copilot. So now, hey, I have to build a PowerPoint deck. Well, I want a picture of Goldie. generate me a picture of Goldie wearing aviator sunglasses, tinted gold, and in downtown Tulsa, looking up at the sky and at sunrise. That's actually an image. If you look at my Twitter account, I actually generated that. And that's my point, is that so quickly the PowerPoint deck, the imagery, and even reasoning over your presentation. Most people don't realize it's built in a PowerPoint. You can practice your presentation, and it will tell you where you're stuttering, where you're taking too long, where you and take Copilot to the next step, which is to say your context is getting lost in your storytelling or lack thereof. Those are examples of where AI is coming into play for businesses. We've talked a lot about business process automation. If X happens inside the organization, do this series of events. So there's tools like Power Apps, which are low code or no code environments. So Copilot was rapidly deployed there as well. In a matter of 6 weeks, almost every product line in Microsoft now has a Copilot capability that's been announced and will be released in short fashion. And so I think all organizations are going to go through this kind of shift. But the feedback that I give, or the pattern that I see most often, or saw most often in C-suite conversations, was this belief that AI is the end result. It is not a product. It is not a service. It's a tool. It's a capability. What you need to do is start off with what's the business problem that you're trying to solve, and then work back from that. What's the problem? How do we measure success? And then you determine if AI, it could be machine learning, it could be deep neural networks. You look at the different tools and see which ones are going to make you successful. You're going to hear a lot about foundational models. Part of the reason why AI is exploding right now is because our storage, compute, and networking, compute in particular, 10 years ago, you would run one simulation and go for in 24 hours, you go ahead and run another one. And then 7 years ago, you would run 2 simulations over a coffee break. Now you're able to run thousands of years worth of simulations in a matter of a day. And so what's happening is that almost like Lego blocks, these individual models, these foundational models can now be appended to each other to solve more complex problems. If you want to see an example where OpenAI is doing this, they recently launched a plugin model, which is going to enable you to plug in all sorts of different services. And so identifying the business problem, working back from that, that's the #1 way to be effective in using AI.
Yeah, I'll maybe add a little bit to that.
Please.
We use actually Microsoft Sentinel, which is a big repository of security telemetry. And just in the amount of scope, we upload about 1 terabyte of data a day to this. And so just if you don't know how much that is, it's a lot. And what it really means is it's too much for a human to go look at that much information for it to be able to make it work that way. And so future, I mean, kind of what we're talking about now. I know we're talking about the free version that we have today, but for corporations, a lot of us are going to be able to use the power of the Azure environment with being able to plug in to GPT, hopefully GPT-4, and we'll be able to get real-time analysis on somebody's trying to get into somebody's bank account, or we don't feel like this voice sounds like it's the person that owns the account. And so those are some real-time type of scenarios that we'll be able to use, probably within 3 to 4 years with technology like this.
One of the things I'm interested in is like interpretable AI too, because it is amazing that people have figured out all these architectures that plug in together, but people don't really know why they work. Like they do a great job at what they were asked to do, but how does it work? It's sort of like asking how your brain works. Like you don't really know, and that maybe is how. And so it'd be nice if we could. And I think people would have more trust in them too if we did understand. And maybe that's a fool's errand. And maybe we'll just have to just trust what it can output. And I think that it will be an interesting thing to study is maybe even understanding how our brains work. Is if we can understand what the neural network is putting together to make this decision, maybe that will help us understand how our brains work and understand how like real AI would work as well. So I think there's a lot of research questions and also like trust issues, because I think a big part of AI is, can I trust it? And a lot of it is, it's not so much the algorithm. Like if you understood how the algorithm that would help, like how it's making the decision, or if it's doing it based on race or something, like those would be good red flags to have. But a lot of it, like you guys have said, is like the training data. Like, is it trained on biased data? And that's what we've given it.
Right. I think there's a difference between maybe a consumer using Chat GPT and then organizations saying, from the fact that we're gonna have to trust it, right? For financial institutions, technology institutions, regulators, that is not such a thing. Of like, just trust us, right? And so we have to show, and this is the difficulty of AI, is where are the sources coming from? So if we're going to use this data, a lot of times you can look at a Google page and you can say, I reference it from here, and this is where these individuals like to see that. You can't do that today, and you may never be able to do that because it's part of the secret sauce that OpenAI and Microsoft have within their models.
Well, that's going to continue to be a problem in regard to the secret sauce because it's no longer open, right? It's for profit now, right? But you brought up earlier about you need to show show your work, right? Within ChatGPT, which you guys know, I mean, you can tell it to show me your work, and it will walk backwards how it got to what it displays to you. And it's fascinating. And it gives you a little more trust, right? You're not going to understand the algorithms or anything going on, particularly a general user, right? Particularly regulatory issues, but it's fascinating. So as you are playing with it, add that little feature in there. Show your work.
I think you also touch on the challenge in terms of compliance and the need for governance. So the ability, particularly in a heavily regulated industry such as healthcare, false positive, false negative has significant impact on individuals and economics as well. Same in financial services. But on the governance side, one of the things that we did early on was actually formulated a council to develop basically a code of ethics and a set of policies around responsible AI. Now, this group wasn't your traditional Microsoft group of data scientists, developers, and business leaders. We had philosophers, we had ethicists, folks who studied the humanities, because what we recognize is that having that level of diversity in terms of debating, discussing, and challenging, and ultimately deciding on what that set of policy should be was important, especially before we start rolling this out across almost 200,000 employees. So now for any product that's customer facing at Microsoft, you have to go through an actual responsible AI assessment where you evaluate across, I believe we were up to 9 dimensions when I left, in terms of the capability. And if there's any potential that it's going to cause harm, it has to get kicked up to another group that reviews it even further. I've seen in cases where it has to go in front of Satya and the senior leadership team, the CEO and the senior leadership team, on whether or not to do this. I'll give you a concrete example, which goes back to what you were talking about in terms of reasoning over signals that nobody else, like a human, could not possibly see. In the early stages of the Ukrainian war, a major attack was launched, a digital attack was launched against the Ukrainians. The first place that it was identified was actually all of the Windows PCs that are anonymously providing signal through my Windows Defender. And they identified patterns that a coordinated attack with a specific type of virus was being injected into their regional network. And so in a matter of hours, the team deconstructed and pushed out an antivirus pattern into Windows Defender and basically stopped a very significant, it could have been crippling to the Ukrainian government at the time. And by the way, all that's public, it's been written on. And I think that's part of what's important here is to publish what you're learning. I mean, we're an institute of higher education. That's what I'm really excited about seeing, with the faculty, is learning from you, over the next few years.
I think several of the panelists have made the point that these type of tools are just that. They're a tool, right? Like a hammer, right? A hammer is not good or bad, not moral or amoral or immoral. I can take a hammer and I can crush your skull and take your wallet, or I can take a hammer and I can build a house for a homeless person. And so the value and virtue of this tool comes from how we use the tools. And so I think it's just really important for us to think about how we use the tool, be very transparent about it, and to use it in such a way that is ethical and that we can feel good about people. You know, if it were on the front page of the paper, we'd feel good about that.
Yes, go ahead.
Okay, so I'll repeat the question. What other career fields or skills are also going to be benefiting from ChatGPT in the near future? To get that right? Okay, great. So if I were an attorney, I would absolutely want to learn how to use ChatGPT effectively. And let me go a little bit further with that. I'm not talking about ChatGPT, the general version that you can play with on OpenAI or in Bing or others. I'm talking about domain specific. And this is really where we're going to see a bit of a gold rush happening, similar to what we saw with the internet. Because many of these language models are built on open academics, the bar is actually not that high to be able to go ahead and build a specific model for a specific domain. In fact, I was talking to a company earlier today that they're running headlong into the medical space. So, you know, if you think about the challenges in terms of taking both structured and unstructured data, doctor's notes that may be handwritten, could be voice. You know, how do I take the longitudinal data of all the data that's provided during a hospital stay? And then how do you reason over that and then provide it as almost like a co-pilot for doctors? So attorneys and doctors, I think we're going to see, and we will all benefit, you know, from significant improvements. In many cases, we already are. We just don't realize it. In terms of areas I think are going to also be impacted, marketing. You know, so I spent, you know, the first third of my year doing, third of my career doing technical marketing, and I learned kind of the traditional P&G model, right? And you had to do value prop, positioning, messaging. How do I distill down, you know, the essence of a product? Well, now I have a tool that can accelerate it significantly. I have a blog. I like to barbecue. I write about barbecue. I asked ChatGPT for a recipe for my Traeger, and it spit out a roasted chicken recipe for me. And then I had it write me a blog post, and I clocked it. And I saw about a 60%, 50 to 60% gain in terms of time, or reduced it. We're going to see that across every domain in business.
I think some of the ones that we'll see, you know, definitely from the cybersecurity side is prompt engineering, right? Like how people write these things. I mean, you can go ask it just very simple questions, right? But if you want to get the value out of it, you got to be able to do it. Learn prompt engineering. One of the areas that we're very interested in is for people to learn how to break stuff with this. Meaning, we understand that somebody wrote a Python script, did 28 prompt engineering type things, and created a polymorphic virus that kind of spit it out. They had to know how to put the code together. But just think about that if somebody can do that and have no knowledge of how to initiate a virus, how do we get to the good side of this, right? Because that's all you're going to hear is the bad side of these things. But if we don't use it on the good side, we're going to be way behind. And we're hoping that people learn both sides of it and are able to continue to help you know, banks and other organizations.
Those are good examples. I was going to jump in with an academics, like it's affecting academic publishing as well. So just like people use it to write their essays, like professors are using it to help them write papers. And there was a famous, infamous example where someone was like writing a paper a day, and it was just like ChatGPT was just cranking out these scientific papers. And like some journals have come out and said, like, you can't have ChatGPT as a co-author. Sorry.
So, Paul, I had a question similar to what you mentioned a minute ago. So you said, okay, so BOK, let's take it for example, is going to be looking, you're going to have your population of bank data. And so you're going to try to train it, you're going to be, but meanwhile, there's banks all over that are going to be looking at the same challenges.
Correct.
Do we see opportunities for like maybe demasking information, sharing it industry wide so that all boats rise? Or is this an arms race between each individual, corporation to say, well, we want to be better than the other versus we want to just be better as a society? And you mentioned healthcare, right? It's infuriating. Every time you go to a new provider, you have to fill out these same forms on paper again. Why isn't that shared? Why isn't? So maybe speak to the bigger piece of how can we train these things with more data than just individual silos trying to solve the problem?
Yeah, from the banking side, there's a program called Open Banking, and it has nothing to do with artificial intelligence, but it has everything to do with sharing financial data as well as if the individual gives permission to do that, to where you can move accounts, your wealth management accounts and so on within a matter of minutes to another bank, right? Hopefully be okay. But those are some things that are going on right now. As far as how do we train, would we ever share what we train? And the answer is absolutely no. There's too many privacy rules. There would be a backlash if we were sharing your data. Let's say it was your biometrics and you had all these kind of things, and we wanted to go ahead and give that to Bank of America.
I was thinking more of the security, like threats.
Oh, the telemetry, the cyber telemetry. Oh, absolutely. And we do that today without artificial intelligence. We do it through automation. So if we see attacks coming in from to BOK, we will send it to the FBI. We'll send it to a community of practice that we share, and it's called sticks and taxi. And so that's the methodology that we share information to other banks and law enforcement.
Well, we're talking about things that have excellent beneficent consequences. AI also has, and you've been talking about low-level AI, I gather. But what about the possibility that AI develops a conscious? And I would like to direct a question to you, especially Dr. Kish. What sort of implications does AI have for our politics?
I can start us off maybe. I can't answer the question about consciousness. I'm hearing, from what I'm reading from those who are much more technically in the weeds, I'm hearing both, Google engineers walking off the job saying it's too close, it's too close, it's too scary, and then others laughing that off. I don't think we're anywhere near general AI yet. But now is the time to start thinking, because things are moving very quickly. And so it's a time to be asking, what do we want of these systems? How do we want to assert control over them? How do we want to define their potential futures and what they can offer for us, and how we want to use them? I think coming from a humanities standpoint and coming from the point of view of an educator, but also someone who's connected to a lot of these more creative and expressive sectors, it raises a lot of questions about the work that people do, how people find satisfying and fulfilling jobs. We're hearing a lot of examples of how these tools, which they are, increase efficiency and productivity and help streamline workflows and offer a lot of advantages. But as these tools become better and better at taking over and efficiently or effectively doing a lot of things that people find very satisfying in their jobs, right? Like writing, finding their voice, making art, designing things. There are a lot of questions about, well, what's the future of work generally? And so one question that I'm always thinking of, and this was sort of prompted by, the scientific journal Nature had an op-ed a little while ago. And so this author asked, everyone's very focused on like, what can it do, or what's accurate or inaccurate in the outputs of something like ChatGPT. But what we should also be asking about is, how is it shifting power, and who is it empowering and who is it not empowering? who is included in the design, in shaping its capabilities, and putting those parameters in place, about how it can be used, or what are the internal guardrails about, not helping people, or encouraging people to commit suicide, for instance, as was the case with someone in Spain, I believe, was sort of potentially maybe talked into or encouraged along those lines, and ended up killing himself. There are a lot of ethical questions, and we need to be asking very much who's in the room, right? As you say, is it just data scientists and engineers who are just very concerned about solving individual tech problems, or what are the bigger domains of those questions that we should be asking? So I think that there are a lot of questions for politics. As we know, our lawmakers are not always the most up to date on how these things work. It's a little bit painful watching congressional hearings about when Silicon Valley leaders come and try and explain how the internet works. And so there are a lot of impacts that are happening so quickly that we all have to step in and be asking those questions in our institutions, in our classrooms, in our workplaces, and demanding that of our leaders. So there's a few quick thoughts. I'm sure everyone has thoughts on this.
I love that. I mean, what does it mean to be a creator? So if we look at what happened this past weekend with Drake and The Weeknd. So it was this big collaboration. Turns out it was an artificially generated soundtrack or music track that was generated that faked Drake's song, or faked Drake's sound and The Weeknd. Somebody managed to get it on Apple Music, on Spotify, and it started racing up the charts, and no one realized that these were completely fake generated tracks. And so I think that's a great example of how this is starting to take off in a really unusual kind of way. We have to have that conversation now, or being a creator is going to have a Napster moment is one of my concerns.
Well, and also just to add to that, creative producers are very concerned about how their data is being used to create these outputs, but they're not getting kickbacks on any of this stuff, and not being attributed, because these things are always very difficult to sort of parse what's inspiration, what's stealing. That's always a big question in IP and other legal areas. But this is a whole other level of processing human-made creations, human produced data that we don't have ownership over anymore, and that it's being digested and repurposed without often being able to acknowledge where it originally comes from. You can only prompt it so far to tell me where is this stuff coming from. And so that raises a lot of questions for all the material that we are putting into this that is then being digested and creating these outputs. So. I think that's a great question. I think that's one that we're still trying to figure out how to do well. I'm biased towards better educating folks. I'm realizing now as I say this that I think our media studies department needs to just have an entry level like media literacy class that would actually talk about a lot of these things. And I think that should be a required course in high school. I think that should be a required entry level course in universities everywhere. I think part of it comes to education. Part of it comes to regulation. I think part of it comes to really engaging more openly about these questions so that this is explicitly in the public domain, so that people are thinking when they're reading stuff, who has actually written this? Do I know? Do I know to be fact checking the things that I'm questioning? If CNET is using ChatGPT to produce these summaries of, whatever, it was producing a lot of explainers and had very hilarious, sometimes just basic arithmetic mistakes. So we want to know, like, what is this material? What is it sourcing, and how much do I have to check it, or how do we establish trust? But it's also, as much as it's drawing from Wikipedia and all these other online sources, ChatGPT is also drawing from 4chan and all these other places. So we just have to really be very much more conscientious about the sourcing and think about that.
I think we have time for like 2 or 3 more questions. I saw, yep.
I would ask if you like the drinks interactions as much as you've done it, but on the more serious side, I'm a late adopter and I haven't interacted with ChatGPT, but wanted to ask you, I also read articles about it. It was all in English language press. There's a big world out there, multilingual. What are the ChatGPT capabilities in other languages? Is it on par with English? Is it different, and are you seeing different trends in how world the other languages and other cultures interact with?
My understanding is that it's really good. I mean, most of the internet is dominated by English language, but my what I from talking to people who have experience with it, it actually works really well, and it learns it learns the language, and it sounds like a native speaker in those languages as well. So because the tool itself is just really good at looking at patterns and understanding, or not understanding, that's the wrong word, but basically mimicking that grammar correctly.
Yeah, and I can tell you from a cybersecurity perspective, from phishing, everybody knows what phishing is, right? And so if they could take, multiple different languages and put them into GPT, they can craft a beautiful sounding, realistic email for you to click on. And so, and we can tell that it does it in multiple languages because, threat actors are everywhere. Right. And so we see a lot of these things come through. Of course, when they see something come in from Russian, they immediately delete that. So that doesn't work very well.
Definitely good at computer language as well.
A lot of these models have data that's trained, from 2021. So take on that. How can we get new data, real-time data into these without going outside the guardrails and filling it with misinformation? And is there work being done? Or sure there is, but do we know anything about how to, I think from a cybersecurity perspective, data that's 2 years old is sometimes fairly worthless. Things move so fast. Coding, PowerShell, as mentioned, the PowerShell that it outputs from 3.5 may not work on current versions of software without issues. How do we get that up to current times?
You want to take that?
It's the arms race. Get in.
Sure. So the largest model that I'm aware of that's ever been trained has over 1.2 trillion parameters, and that's a Google model, which is similar to ChatGPT. However, it's not performing as well in scoring results, and I think part of the reason is because of we're kind of witnessing this shift from semantic search, which is what we all use in Google, to relationship driven AI, which is what ChatGPT uses. But the amount of compute required in order to train up the model is huge when you're dealing with it with hundreds of millions, billions of parameters. So you get this fixed point in time. In fact, ChatGPT will tell you, I'm sorry, I can't answer you what's who's playing at Canes next week. My data set stops at 2021. So this is where semantic search starts to kind of blend in, and this is what Microsoft's trying to do with Bing. And where if you do a chat with Bing, it will tell you that it's searching the internet using semantic search to layer on top of what it already believes from the ChatGPT algorithm. It will cite references. So this is a part of that responsible AI. You get footnotes so you know where the data sources are coming from. And then the other piece of it, to your point, like how do you now use that reinforcement to train it? The thumbs up and thumbs down that you see right next to the response. And if you go back and say, no, I wasn't actually talking about, the country of Georgia. I was talking about the state of Georgia. It uses that to retrain the model as a part of deep reinforcement learning. So in effect, you're actually helping to improve the algorithm over time. The other key, I would say, shift that we're seeing is in terms of efficiency of training. So using CPUs, GPUs, and TPUs, which are specialized silicon, designed for building up these models. Key thing is like you have to build up the model, which is kind of like building up the brain. And then what you do is you have to what's called inferencing. You now have to run a query against that brain, ask it the question, and then returns the result. The latter is actually much more efficient, both in terms of kind of processing power as well as simplicity of that. Your iPhone today actually has a rudimentary piece of silicon that does that inferencing. It's how it can read a business card or pull you out of an image. We're going to see a pretty significant leap, I would say, and you're exactly right. This was an arms race. I would argue that, for specific domains, there are going to be a lot of boutique players. There's going to be a whole new industry of companies that build data models and groom data to get it into a format that you can use it to train the model. But the ones that are building these big models, it's going to be Amazon, Google, Microsoft, and a few others, overseas that have the sheer capital to do it.
So back to the question about who this technology, excuse me, who's being affected in terms of balance of power by this technology. What about the balance of wealth? What responsibility do the corporations and organizations that are best positioned to leverage this technology have to, rather than optimizing profit, perhaps optimize other functions like economic stability or social?
And this will be the last question.
We have two panelists who have to leave kind of early. I wanted to say thank you guys for your time. I think it's Sean Alexander and Zenia Kish. Questions can still happen, but they do happen. I wanted to give you guys of course. Thank you for your
I'm going to say thank you so much. I hope this is the first of many conversations between the college and the community on current issues and topics.
Thank you guys.
Sure, and then I'm gonna off the mic. I highly encourage. So I bought for everybody on my team Max Tegmark's book Life 3.0. So Max Tegmark is a physicist at MIT. Is actually one of the preeminent voices on AI. And while the book was written in 2017, it still holds up, and it's great for any business leader to understand kind of the fundamentals of societal impact as well as and wealth impact that AI is going to have. And I used to say might have, but especially over what's happened over the past 5 years, I think it provides a really good blueprint. In fact, I was just telling the chair of the board of trustees, I think we should do a book club and all read the book together to get that grounding. So,
well, I think it's a good question. I mean, if you think about like 1995, when the internet came out, and how we still have individuals in countries that have no internet, right? So that's, you talk about balance of wealth, just something as simple as having internet connectivity just to be able to get to utilize ChatGPT. And so that, I think that's a big part of it.
We're still trying to address that equity.
Yes.
Yeah.
So thank you guys so much for your time. I want to give a special shout out to Lydia, who helped to organize this event. Let's please give her a So our panelists, thank you so much for your time. Everyone, the questions can continue. We have reception next door. So if you head out either one of these doors and turn left, you will see reception with food and drink. And let's keep this conversation going. Thank you. They're over here. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, I wanted to know before you.
Good job. That right talk, that was really good. Whatever perspective.
So much. I'm really glad that Lydia did a fabulous job organizing this. This was great. What? Yeah. So let's speak together. So